Before there was Wallis Simpson, the twice-divorced American for whom a king would forsake his crown, there were others. A glittering gallery of socialites, aristocrats, and bold, unconventional women who orbited the restless Prince of Wales. Each woman, in her way, shaped the future Edward VIII, leaving behind traces of scandal, heartbreak, and intrigue. Today on Regal Chronicles, we delve into the hidden, tangled world of the women in Edward VIII's life before Wallis Simpson. From the earliest days of his public life, Prince Edward, Prince of Wales, was a source of unease for the House of Windsor. Handsome, charismatic, and possessed of an undeniable magnetism, the young prince captivated crowds wherever he went. But behind the charm lay a restless, rebellious spirit, a man who bristled against the stifling constraints of royal life and sought escape in the company of women deemed wholly unsuitable by the court. In the years following the Great War, Britain was a nation in mourning. The horrors of the trenches had left scars across the empire, and the public craved stability. The monarchy, led by the stern, traditional King George V, clung to its formalities and rituals with desperate tenacity. Within this climate, the Prince of Wales was expected to uphold the image of duty, service, and decorum, and eventually settle down with a respectable, well-bred woman of suitable lineage. Among the earliest candidates was Lady Rosemary Leveson-Gower. Born in 1893, Lady Rosemary was the daughter of the 4th Earl of Granville and a scion of one of Britain's most respected aristocratic families. Graceful, poised, and discreet, she embodied the qualities the monarchy sought in a future consort. Rosemary had been carefully groomed for high society, well-versed in the intricacies of royal etiquette, and moved effortlessly through the drawing rooms of England's grandest country houses. Whispers of a potential match began circulating in the early 1910s when the young Prince of Wales, just emerging into public life, encountered Rosemary at a series of aristocratic gatherings and court functions. The British press, though muzzled by convention, hinted at the possibility. Behind the scenes, Queen Mary, ever vigilant about her son's future, reportedly viewed Lady Rosemary as a suitable match, someone who could steady the prince's wayward tendencies and fortify the House of Windsor. At a time when the monarchy looked warily at continental alliances, an English bride of Rosemary's lineage would have been a welcome alternative. Her mother, Lady Rose Bowes-Lyon, was a cousin to the future Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, strengthening the royal family's ties within the British peerage. Yet the relationship between Edward and Rosemary was never one of intense passion. Though frequently in one another's company at weekend parties, society balls, and royal events, theirs was a connection marked by courtly formality rather than reckless romance. Lady Rosemary was reserved by nature, her demeanour in keeping with the expectations of the aristocracy. She reportedly admired the prince's charm and adored his quick wit, but was wary of his reputation as a flirt and his restless spirit. Edward, for his part, was attracted to Rosemary's elegance and discretion. But as with so many of the carefully selected candidates presented to him, he soon grew indifferent to the notion of a dynastic match. Letters exchanged between courtiers of the time hint at a mutual respect, even mild affection, but little evidence of genuine emotional depth. While Queen Mary continued to nurture hopes of a possible engagement, the prince's private diaries and correspondence suggest that he found Lady Rosemary far too conventional for his tastes. The final blow to any romantic prospects came during the immediate post-war years. While Edward returned to Britain in 1918, a national hero, lauded for his tours of the Western Front and morale-boosting visits to soldiers, he was also deeply changed. The horrors of war left him cynical, disillusioned, and impatient with royal expectations. Increasingly, the prince sought companionship among lively, unconventional women, those whose wit, irreverence, and disregard for propriety thrilled him. Lady Rosemary, though everything a royal bride ought to have been, simply did not inspire the kind of reckless devotion Edward craved. By 1919, even Queen Mary began to accept that the match was unlikely. In private, she bemoaned her son's growing disdain for duty and his infatuation with married socialites. Lady Rosemary, dignified and self-possessed, quietly stepped back from the prince's orbit, marrying William Ward, 3rd Earl of Dudley, in 1919. In the years that followed, Lady Rosemary remained a respected figure in society and at court, eventually becoming a lady-in-waiting to Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. Though her brief association with the Prince of Wales was largely forgotten by the public, within aristocratic circles, it remained one of the many what-ifs that marked Edward's troubled romantic life. With Lady Rosemary out of the picture, royal courtiers turned their attention overseas. In the search for a suitable bride, various foreign princesses were discreetly considered. Among them, Princess Marie-José of Belgium. The youngest daughter of King Albert V of Belgium, Marie-José was beautiful, cultured, and of impeccable Catholic pedigree, though this religious difference alone presented a significant obstacle. Ultimately, the idea came to nothing, as Edward showed little interest, and Marie-José went on to marry the Crown Prince of Italy. Princess Ingrid of Sweden, a charming, vivacious young woman with close ties to the British royal family, Ingrid was viewed as another possible candidate. She was well liked by Queen Mary, who admired her grace and quiet confidence. But again, Edward remained indifferent, finding dynastic marriages a dreary prospect. Other names occasionally floated by the court included Princess Olga of Yugoslavia and Princess Marina of Greece and Denmark, the latter eventually marrying Edward's brother Prince George, Duke of Kent. The truth was that Edward had, by this stage, established a clear pattern in his romantic life. He was drawn not to princesses and débutantes, but to spirited, worldly women, often married, often older, and almost always controversial. In private, courtiers despaired at his aversion to duty and his growing fascination with scandal. Even as Lady Rosemary represented everything the monarchy desired, Edward longed for the company of women who defied convention. As one courtier would later remark, the prince was happiest in the company of those who laughed too loudly, danced too wildly, and cared too little for the court's disapproval. This yearning for the forbidden would define the prince's love life for decades, culminating, of course, in the most scandalous love affair of the 20th century. If Prince Edward, Prince of Wales, had a type, it began, unmistakably, with Freda Dudley Ward. A woman of charm, wit, and quietly defiant independence, Freda embodied everything that Edward craved and everything the court feared. Born Winifred May Birkin in 1894, Freda was the daughter of Sir Thomas Birkin, a wealthy Nottingham lace manufacturer. Though not born into the aristocracy, Freda's family was affluent and well-connected within upper-class society. In 1913, at the age of 19, she married William Dudley Ward, a Liberal Member of Parliament and prominent sportsman. It was, by all accounts, a conventional and socially advantageous match. The couple had 2 daughters, Penelope and Claire. But Freda's marriage, like so many of her class and era, was one of mutual convenience rather than romantic fulfillment. In 1918, as Britain was staggering under the weight of the Great War's final year, Prince Edward met Freda at a society gathering. Edward, freshly returned from morale-boosting tours of the Western Front, was a national icon. Freda, with her striking dark hair, sparkling wit, and easy laugh, immediately caught his attention. What began as a flirtation over cocktails and clever banter swiftly blossomed into something far deeper. Freda was everything the prince found lacking within the stiff, stifling walls of Buckingham Palace, warm, worldly, affectionate, and delightfully irreverent. Their relationship moved with the giddy intensity of wartime romance. Within weeks, Edward was besotted. he would visit Freda's home at number 15 Grosvenor Square under the guise of evening drives or discreet dinners. The pair shared private rendezvous in country houses and quiet corners of London's elite clubs. Freda, unusually for a woman of her time and position, was unapologetically herself. She refused to play the demure, deferential mistress. Instead, she teased, challenged, and soothed the prince in equal measure. She gave him what no one else in his gilded, isolated world could: intimacy without obligation. For over a decade, from 1918 to 1929, Freda Dudley Ward remained Edward's most enduring mistress. Their affair unfolded in the heady years of the Roaring Twenties, a time of jazz parties, scandalous new fashions, and post-war disillusionment. Within London's elite circles, the relationship was an open secret. Freda was a fixture at social events attended by the prince, seated conspicuously at his side. Their closeness was so apparent that courtiers quietly despaired, but officialdom turned a blind eye. The British press, bound by an unspoken understanding with the palace and an era's sense of propriety, studiously ignored the affair. To the public, Edward remained the dashing, unmarried Prince of Wales, a beloved bachelor prince. But behind palace gates and the heavy drapes of London's drawing rooms, everyone knew Freda was the woman who truly held his heart. Freda's influence on Edward was profound. She became his confidant, advisor, and emotional anchor. It was to Freda that he poured out his frustrations with court life, his strained relationship with his father, King George V, and his growing weariness with the burdens of royal duty. In one rare, candid letter to Freda, preserved in the royal archives, Edward confessed, "I've never loved anyone as I love you, and never shall." Such declarations underscored the depth of his attachment. Freda was, in every sense, the prince's first great love. Their affair set a clear precedent. From Freda onwards, Edward would be drawn almost exclusively to married women of strong character, worldly experience, and unorthodox charm. These were women unencumbered by the obligations of a dynastic marriage, and therefore free to offer companionship on his terms. While Queen Mary, a paragon of Edwardian propriety, was horrified by her son's infatuation, King George V displayed a typically pragmatic attitude. The king loathed scandal, but understood the value of keeping his son's indiscretions discreetly managed. Provided the affair remained private, and Freda did not presume to wield influence in court affairs, it was reluctantly tolerated. Courtiers, however, fretted over Freda's sway. Sir Alan Tommy Lascelles, the prince's private secretary, noted in his diaries the prince's increasing obsession with her. Lascelles feared Freda would prove a distraction from Edward's official duties and encourage his growing disdain for protocol. Their relationship caused tension not only within the royal household, but among Freda's own social set. Though some admired her daring, others whispered that she had overstepped the invisible line between mistress and influence wielder. As the 1920s drew to a close, the unthinkable began to happen. Freda's hold over Edward began to loosen. After more than a decade, the prince's restless nature reasserted itself. The heady thrill of their early romance faded into comfortable routine. While Freda remained deeply attached to Edward, his attentions began to stray. Enter a new figure. Thelma Furness, another married socialite with a magnetic personality and a hint of American audacity. Edward's infatuation with Thelma in the early 1930s marked the beginning of Freda's eclipse. Though their intimate relationship waned, Freda and Edward remained close friends. She would continue to correspond with the prince for years, and in quieter moments, Edward would nostalgically recall the easy warmth and undemanding affection she had offered him in those post-war years. In 1931, Freda divorced William Dudley Ward, further scandalizing polite society. Though speculations swirled that Edward might finally make an honest woman of her, such notions were swiftly quashed. By then, the prince had turned his gaze toward a far more dangerous prospect: Wallis Simpson. Freda's affair with Edward marked the first great love story in his long, scandalous romantic life. She embodied a pattern he would repeat for the rest of his days. A yearning for women of experience, independence, and irreverent wit, paired with a deep-seated aversion to conventional marriage. Within the royal family, Freda was quietly forgotten, an inconvenient memory swept aside by the seismic scandal of the abdication years later. But for those who knew the prince intimately, she remained the woman who had, for a time, held his heart in her hands. If Freda Dudley Ward was Prince Edward's first great love, Thelma, Viscountess Furness, was the glittering, glamorous rival who carried the torch into the dazzling twilight years of the 1920s and early 1930s. An American by birth, Thelma Morgan was born in 1904 to Harry Hayes Morgan, a United States diplomat, and Laura Delphine Kilpatrick. Thelma was no ordinary society girl. She and her identical twin sister Gloria Morgan moved through the upper echelons of New York, Paris, and London society with effortless charm. Gloria, incidentally, would go on to marry Reginald Vanderbilt and become the mother of the future style icon, Gloria Vanderbilt. Thelma's upbringing was one of glittering ballrooms, elite finishing schools, and an early introduction to the intoxicating mix of wealth and scandal. She married Marmaduke Furness, first Viscount Furness, one of Britain's wealthiest shipping magnates in 1926. It was her second marriage, and like many transatlantic unions of the era, it was as much a social alliance as a love match. By 1929, Thelma and Marmaduke's marriage was unravelling. Thelma, chic, vivacious, and famously flirtatious, was restless. It was in this climate that she crossed paths with the Prince of Wales. From the moment they met, the chemistry between Thelma and Edward was undeniable. The prince, forever drawn to confident, worldly women, was captivated by Thelma's American directness, her modern sense of style, and her irreverent humour. She was, in every sense, the embodiment of jazz-age glamour. A woman who exuded the restless energy of an era unshackled by Victorian restraint. Their affair began discreetly, with stolen glances at London dinner parties and flirtatious exchanges at society balls. But it swiftly escalated into one of the prince's most notorious romances. Thelma's life of glittering house parties, country weekend retreats, and risque high society diversions suited Edward perfectly. She introduced him to a world far removed from the dour court functions and stiff diplomatic engagements demanded by King George V.
The prince spent increasing amounts of time at Thelma's elegant residences, notably Borough Court, a sprawling Leicestershire estate where the British aristocracy gathered for weekends of hunting, drinking, and scandalous gossip. It was at Borough Court, in January 1931, that Thelma would unknowingly introduce the greatest rival of her life. Among the guests at one of Thelma's famous house parties was a fellow American socialite, Wallis Simpson. At the time, Wallis was married to her second husband, Ernest Simpson, a mild-mannered British-American shipping executive. She was clever, sharp-tongued, and exuded a boldness that intrigued the prince. When Edward was introduced to Wallis, there was little immediate spark. She was simply another figure in the prince's vast social orbit, amusing, yes, but unremarkable in the moment. No one could have predicted the storm that would follow. For several years, Thelma Furness maintained her position as Edward's favored companion. She was more than a mistress. She was a hostess, confidant, and social gatekeeper. It was through her that the prince accessed the most fashionable corners of British and American high society. Their affair was an open secret in court circles. While Queen Mary and King George V disapproved, they turned a blind eye, provided Thelma made no public claims to Edward's affection. British newspapers, still observing the long-standing code of royal discretion, remained silent. Thelma basked in her royal lover's attention, and for a time, she genuinely believed she had secured a lasting place in his heart. Her glamour and daring American charm seemed to offer the prince a glittering escape from the burdens of kingship. But, as with Freda before her, Edward's affection was capricious. In 1934, Thelma made what would prove to be a catastrophic mistake. She departed for an extended trip to America to visit her twin sister Gloria, who at the time was embroiled in a notorious custody battle for her daughter, young Gloria Vanderbilt. Thelma's absence created a vacuum, and into that space stepped Wallis Simpson. During those crucial months, Wallis insinuated herself ever deeper into Edward's inner circle. She accompanied him to private dinners, weekend retreats, and even quiet family occasions. Her bold, bracing manner, part motherly caretaker, part sharp-tongued conspirator, ensnared the emotionally needy prince. When Thelma returned from America later that year, she found that her place had been usurped. Wallis was now firmly entrenched at Edward's side. Thelma was devastated. She had not only lost her lover, but also her carefully cultivated position within the royal social world. The betrayal cut deeply because it came at the hands of a woman she had considered a friend. In her memoir, Double Exposure, Thelma later wrote with bitter poignancy, "I left a friend alone with a lonely man, and she took my place." In the aftermath of the rupture, Thelma withdrew from royal circles. Marmaduke Furness divorced her, citing adultery, a scandal eagerly devoured by London society, even if officially ignored by the press. Thelma retreated to America, where she lived in relative obscurity, occasionally appearing in society pages as the elegant twin of the ever-controversial Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt. She would never regain her former prominence in Britain. And though Edward's affair with Wallis would soon scandalize the world, forcing his abdication in 1936, Thelma remained a cautionary tale within aristocratic circles, the glamorous socialite who dared to love a prince and lost everything. Thelma's relationship with Edward, though often overshadowed by the cataclysmic love affair that followed, was pivotal. She offered him a glittering, hedonistic world at a time when he was growing increasingly disillusioned with the obligations of the crown. She was also, crucially, the woman who brought Wallis Simpson into his orbit. Had Thelma never hosted that fateful weekend at Borough Court in 1931, the history of the British monarchy might have unfolded along an entirely different path. The abdication crisis, which would shake the House of Windsor to its foundations, had its roots in Thelma's glamorous, doomed affair. Between the passionate affair with Freda Dudley Ward and the doomed romance with Thelma Furness, the Prince of Wales's love life was a mosaic of whispered liaisons and secret rendezvous. Among the most intriguing of these rumored entanglements was Edwina Mountbatten, a woman whose beauty, intellect, and unconventional spirit made her both captivating and controversial. Born Edwina Cynthia Annette Ashley in 1901, she was an heiress of immense wealth and pedigree. The granddaughter of Sir Ernest Cassel, one of Edward VII's closest friends, Edwina was raised amid privilege. But it was her fierce independence, not her fortune, that made her a force in society. In 1922, she married Lord Louis Mountbatten, a well-connected naval officer and cousin to both Edward and Prince Philip. Their marriage, though aristocratically sound, was famously open. Both pursued extramarital affairs, conducted with the discreet indulgence expected of their class. By the late 1920s, Edwina and the Prince of Wales were appearing in society columns, their names often linked at weekend retreats and private dinners. No love letters or explicit proof survives, royal archives saw to that. But the rumors were persistent. Edward was drawn to women like Edwina, vivacious, headstrong, and defiantly uninterested in courtly constraints. Unlike many of Edward's companions, Edwina was far more than decorative. Politically astute and deeply engaged in humanitarian work, she later became known for her efforts with the Red Cross and her pivotal role during the partition of India. Even in youth, she was restless, hungry for meaning beyond high society. The possibility of an affair with a married cousin's wife might have scandalized the public, but within aristocratic circles, it was just another whispered anecdote. Discretion was the unspoken rule, and Edwina, like Edward, excelled at it. King George V, a moralist to his core, disapproved of his son's growing ties to such women, while Queen Mary catalogued Edward's romantic missteps in silence. Edwina herself remained unruffled. Her unconventional marriage allowed her a freedom most women of her time were denied. In later years, her alleged romance with Indian Prime Minister Nehru drew far more attention than any whispered link to Edward ever had. What distinguished Edwina from Edward's other lovers was her duality, a woman equally at home in ballrooms and refugee camps. Glamorous, yes, but also driven, daring, and grounded in a world beyond royal pomp. That duality was perhaps what most intrigued Edward. The rumored affair between Edwina and the Prince of Wales remained just that, a rumor. No scandal broke, no confessions emerged. Unlike Freda or Thelma, Edwina left behind no public trace of passion. Instead, she exists as an elegant enigma in Edward's tangled romantic past, her name a whispered footnote in diaries and private recollections. Yet her presence is revealing. Not because she was the great love of Edward's life, but because she embodied the kind of woman he consistently sought. Independent, intelligent, and unconcerned with the crown's suffocating expectations. As one society hostess once quipped, Edward didn't seek wives, he sought accomplices. For a time, Edwina Mountbatten may have been exactly that. As the 1930s progressed, the divide between Edward's private passions and public duty became stark. What had once seemed like youthful indiscretions now hardened into a pattern that alarmed the monarchy and captivated the public. Edward, heir to one of the world's most storied thrones, seemed determined to chart his own path. His father, King George V, a man of order and discipline, watched with growing dismay. To him, Edward's behavior wasn't simply rebellious, it was a threat to the monarchy itself. The prince's neglect of duty, his affairs with married women, and his disdain for state responsibilities were an affront to everything George believed a sovereign must be. Despite repeated efforts to steer him back to the expected path, marriage, decorum, preparation for the crown, Edward resisted. Queen Mary, reserved and staunchly loyal to royal tradition, worried deeply. Behind palace doors, she mourned her son's choices in private letters and conversations, holding out hope long after others gave up. By the time Wallis Simpson entered the scene, Edward was no longer merely rebellious, he was defiant. The American divorcee was not a surprising departure, but rather the culmination of years of calculated resistance to royal expectations. In Wallis, Edward found a partner in every sense, sharp, bold, and unbound by societal norms. She embodied the traits he had long sought: independence, wit, and irreverence. Their affair was not just another scandal, it was the final expression of Edward's refusal to conform. With Wallis, he would make the most perilous choice of all: